9 Strangest Mysteries You've Never Heard of. The conditions that create modern mummies are odd, sometimes in the extreme. Sometimes, they are the victims of violence, but more often these are cases of the elderly, suicide victims, and the tragically alone. In some cases, these modern mummies are created by family members, who through mental illness or religious devotion cannot give up the remains of their beloved. 1. Miracle Child. For nearly 50 years, Argentines have descended upon Banda Florida, Argentina, to ask for miracles from a mysterious mummified baby. In 1967, 1-year-old Miguel Angel Gaitan died of meningitis. The child was buried. However, 7 years later, Miguel's grave and coffin were found open. Cemetery workers initially believed the stones around the burial site were deposited by severe storms, until the deposits continued after the weather improved. At this time, the family decided to give Miguel a glass cover. From the moment Miguel was displayed, his remains appeared mummified. When Daniel Salvator fell ill with a rare pancreas disease 3 years ago, he went to see Miguel Angel Gaitan, and within weeks, he says, he made a full recovery. When Carmen Gores needed a car after her brother wrecked her old Ford, she traveled 300 miles by bus just to touch Miguel Angel. The next week she won a new Peugeot in a church lottery, and sent a thank you note to Miguel Angel, along with a copy of her winning ticket. And when Susie I. Pinza, 11, wanted high marks on her spelling test, she too visited Miguel Angel, and later sent him a copy of her perfect score. For decades, thousands of Argentines, from across the country have been descending on this desolate and northwest town, of 600 people seeking Miguel Angel's miracles. But he is no modern-day prophet, nor is he a saint. In fact, all that remains of Miguel Angel, who died of meningitis in 1966, just short of his first birthday, is a small, wrinkled corpse, which is remarkably well preserved after 30 years. The miracle seekers bring offerings of flowers, teddy bears, toys, clothing and money to the cemetery, where Miguel Angel's body is displayed in a glass-top coffin. We call him the Miracle Child because God has kept his body from decomposing so that all the world can come and see him and be blessed, said Mr. Salvator, a taxi driver, who raised his shirt to show the scars on his abdomen, from his many operations. Argentina has other legends like that of Miguel Angel. The 19th century produced Difunta Coria, who supposedly died of thirst in the desert but was survived by her infant son, who lived for weeks on milk from his dead mother's breasts. Today, Argentines bring bottles of water to a tomb in San Juan province devoted to Difunta Coria in hopes of receiving miracles. Iris Guinazu, an anthropologist who specializes in Argentine folklore, said such myths were a vestige of an indigenous culture that has been all but wiped out in Argentina, the most heavily Europeanized of Latin American nations. She said the Difunta Coria legend is related to that of the Inca god Pachamama, or Mother Earth, who after becoming dust still generates life. These simple, small rituals help preserve the American identity, Ms. Guinazu said of the mixed-race people, who predominate in rural Argentina. For these people, Christianity is too much of an abstraction. They believe in what they see or touch. These rites help them to identify with their true selves. If the miracle seekers who come to Miguel Angel's remains are lucky, the dead baby's mother, Argentina Gaitan, who attends his tomb daily, opens the locked coffin and allows them to touch the corpse's head. If they are really lucky, she dresses the corpse in the baby clothes they bring, like the small soccer uniform, provided by a fan of Argentina's championship team Boca Juniors. Normally they don't get to touch him, but if they ask, I unlock the case and let them, said Mrs. Gaitan, 64, a robust woman who bore 15 children. But you'll get a miracle whether you touch him or not. Pilgrims typically leave small offerings, and Mrs. Gaitan sells cards and trinkets with Miguel Angel's picture for $2, and pamphlets that chronicle his life and death for $15. Miguel Angel's coffin is housed in a 2-story concrete tomb, that is filled with colorful artificial flowers, and testimonials in which Argentines give thanks for the miracles they say the corpse has brought. Miguel Angel, thank you for the miracle. Jose proposed to marry me yesterday, reads a letter from Patricia from Cordoba, a province 450 miles south of Villa Union. Thanks to you, Miguel Angel, I got 100 on my neonatal exam, wrote Juanita, a medical student in Buenos Aires, 900 miles to the southeast. The Reverend Ricky Alberto Martinez, Villa Union's priest, said that while the Roman Catholic Church officially recognizes as saints only those who have been canonized by the Vatican, the Church cannot ignore unofficial saints like Miguel Angel. "We can't negate the feelings that people have for this child, and the faith that he has inspired in them," Father Martinez said. "You can't dismiss them as a bunch of uneducated people from the backwoods. This is a national phenomenon. People are reporting miracles all over the country." Father Martinez, who took up this post in Villa Union 6 months ago, said he would undertake a scientific investigation to determine why Miguel Angel's corpse has not decomposed. The priest also plans to try to document the miracles that people have claimed. If he gathers enough evidence, he said, he will apply to have Miguel Angel beatified, the first step toward sainthood. The legend of Miguel Angel began with a violent rainstorm in 1973, 7 years after his death. According to residents, the tempest unearthed the baby's coffin, which was discovered by a cemetery worker. Peering inside, the worker was surprised to find the child's remains virtually intact, so he built a makeshift tomb to shelter the coffin from the elements. But when he returned the next day, the walls of the tomb had collapsed mysteriously. The stone tomb was rebuilt, but the walls came tumbling down again, so the townspeople decided to leave the coffin out in the open. But then, the story goes, the lid of the coffin kept being removed at night. "We put rocks and heavy objects on the top of the coffin, but every morning we found the lid removed," Mrs. Gaitan said. "Finally we realized that Miguel did not want to be covered. He wanted to be seen, so we placed him in this coffin with a glass lid." As word of the miracle child spread, multitudes began flocking to Villa Union. "We've get tour buses coming from all over the country," said Ramon Ricardo Pabolt, a municipal official. "Miguel Angel has been good for the town and for the people. We all have to believe in something." 2. Jeep Mummy. In March 2014, repairmen discovered the mummified remains of a Michigan woman in the front seat of her Jeep. Authorities believe Pia Fahrenkopf died in 2009, and sat unnoticed for years, until her house went into foreclosure. Her remains were discovered behind the steering wheel, surrounded by piles of unopened mail and a wine bottle. Her remains were too dried out for a conclusive autopsy. The cause of death remains unknown. The key was halfway in the ignition, and the Jeep still had fuel, making it unlikely that she used carbon monoxide as a suicide method. The death of a mummified Michigan woman still baffles relatives and detectives a year after workers discovered her corpse. The case of Pia Fahrenkopf has gone cold, investigators said, and it's unlikely they'll ever know how she wound up dead in the back seat of her own Jeep, turning to dust inside her garage, the Detroit Free Press reported. There was no trauma to body, so it only leads to a couple conclusions, Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard told the Free Press. Either it was a medical situation that led to her death or something self-induced. The reclusive Pontiac woman probably died in 2009, and sat unnoticed for about 5 years until March 2014, when her house went into foreclosure, and repairmen visited to fix a hole in the roof, authorities said. Fahrenkopf was seated behind the driver's seat among piles of unopened mail, and a nearly empty wine bottle. The key was halfway in the ignition, and the Jeep still had gas, making it unlikely she left it running, authorities said. Her organs were too dried out for a conclusive autopsy, and the cause of death was impossible to determine, a medical examiner told the Free Press. Stumped investigators weren't able to learn much about her final days. Fahrenkopf had previously tried to open a gym called Slender Lady, but the deal apparently went bad. Creditors sued, and won more than $116,000 in judgments, although it's not clear if she ever paid, the Free Press reported. Still, Fahrenkopf had a savings of $87,199.80, by the time she resigned from a software company in 2008. She had set up automatic payments for a number of her bills and even tried to cancel her mail. She also cut ties with one of her few friends. Relatives claimed she had traveled for months during her career and often couldn't be reached. Sometimes she would go, literally, for years without us hearing from her, Sister Jean LeBlanc told the Free Press. And then all of a sudden, she'd show up, so nobody ever thought anything about it. Fahrenkopf reportedly paid a neighbor in advance to mow her yard, and he continued even when he realized he hadn't seen her in ages. He eventually assumed she'd moved, but investigators believe she was just feet away in her garage the entire time. It was only after her bank account ran dry, and her house went into foreclosure, that anyone realized the truth. Even then, it took a while. An inspector from the mortgage company examined the house in January 2014, and even looked in the Jeep without noticing the body. The repairmen who came in March 2014 were taking photographs for the mortgage company when they opened the door to the SUV. It smelled like death, one of the workers, Charles Goff, told investigators. It was only then that Farron Cope's relatives learned the truth. They're still hoping someone is able to figure out what really happened. There's got to be something there that somebody missed, Sister Paula Logan told the Free Press. I just hope people don't give up. 3. Detached garage surprise. An anthropologist who assists the Wayne County, Michigan, medical examiner's office with autopsies about once or twice a month will help in the case of a badly decomposing and mummified body discovered last week in the backseat of a car parked in a Detroit garage. We consult with the anthropologist in cases that are more extensively skeletonized, loss of flesh due to decomposition, and where trauma has caused changes that make identification more difficult, such as some kinds of burns, or where animals and insects have damaged the body, Wayne County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Carl Schmidt said in an email Tuesday. Anthropologists also play a major role in some mass disasters, such as airplane crashes, because they help in reconstructing bodies that have suffered extensive fragmentation. The University of Michigan anthropologist helping with the case came in and studied the mummified body, Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office spokesman Lloyd Jackson said, in an email sent Tuesday night. But nothing will be released until she writes her report, which could take 2-3 weeks, he said, adding the cause and manner of death are pending. Anthropologist to examine mummified remains from Detroit garage. On Thursday, a man interested in buying a property in the 19,900 block of Spencer Avenue in Detroit walked into the garage and discovered a body in a 1990 or 1991 Plymouth Acclaim, police said. The medical examiner will make the final determination on cause and manner of death of the remains found lying down in the back seat, but the anthropologist is needed to determine the sex of the body, Jackson said earlier Tuesday. There are features in bones that are used to determine sex, Schmidt explained. For example, the opening in the center of the pelvis is broader in women and narrower in men. The pubic bone can show changes due to the birth process, he said. There are also more subtle measurements, such as in the skull, that you can use. The different features also can help determine ethnicity, he said. Whose remains were in the garage and how long ago that person died isn't clear, but authorities said the body had been there for quite some time, was badly decomposed and mummified. Prospective home buyer finds mummified body in garage. However, determining the time of death is broad and imprecise, Schmidt said, adding it's mainly a subjective assessment of how weathered the burns look, and whether or not they were in a protected environment. The body found in the detached garage on the city's east side had on a shirt, sweater and pants, officials said. The renters told police that the owner said they couldn't use the garage, so they never went inside, police said Friday. We were unable to contact the homeowner, Detroit Police spokeswoman Officer Jennifer Moreno said Tuesday. So we're still in the process of trying to locate them. The Detroit Free Press also was unable to reach the homeowner by phone. A woman at the house on the property, where the body was found, declined to comment earlier this week. Schmidt said even extensively mummified bodies have a distinct odor, but it's not as strong as an actively decomposing body. 4. Mummified baby misconduct. The case against former McHenry County Coroner Marlene Lance, who is accused of failing to properly dispose of the remains of 2 babies, is moving ahead after a judge denied her lawyer's claims that prosecutors misled a grand jury about the allegations. Lance, who was coroner for more than 20 years, before retiring in 2012, faces felony charges of official misconduct and forgery. Authorities lodged the charges after they said the mummified remains of a newborn baby were discovered inside a cardboard box, stored in a cooler in the coroner's morgue in 2015, more than 2 years after Lance left office. The newborn had been found dead in a bathroom of a Crystal Lake restaurant in 1992. No criminal charges were ever filed in connection to the death. In June 2015, a grand jury indicted Lance on additional counts of official misconduct, after authorities said another set of remains, this time involving a fetus that appeared to have been miscarried, also were discovered in the coroner's office. Her lawyer, Jim Harrison, has vehemently argued before Judge Robert Wilbrandt that based on state law, it was responsibility of the babies' families, not the coroner, to bury the children because the identities of both families were known. At a pre-trial hearing this week, Harrison contended that Lance had no legal obligation to bury the remains. At an earlier hearing on the same motion, the judge asked Harrison whether bodies would just stack up, if the coroner is under no obligation to dispose of them in cases where the family does not come forward. Harrison argued that the duty is never passed to the coroner as a matter of law and that, if a family does not come forward, authorities can petition the courts to force the family to act or be held in contempt of court. On Thursday, Wilbrandt again disagreed with this argument, saying that if remains are not collected by the family, then it is the coroner's mandatory duty to see that they are decently buried, cremated or donated. Harrison similarly has failed to gain traction with the judge in the defense attorney's argument that the state's attorney's office committed prosecutorial misconduct by misleading the grand jury that indicted Lance. Harrison has claimed that the grand jury was never told that the family was known to authorities. The grand jury was so blind as to not be able to know about the law, leading to the wrong result, Harrison said. Assistant State's Attorney Michael Combs has called the assertion ludicrous. We didn't deny there was barrens. We didn't deny they were notified. We didn't mislead on any points of the law. You have to bury the dead. You can't just collect dead carcasses, Combs said at a hearing in April. Wilbrandt sided with prosecutors and stood by his decision Thursday. In his ruling, Wilbrandt wrote that he reviewed grand jury transcripts that showed jurors were told the deceased children had parents, that those parents were contacted and notified, and that presumably after nearly 20 years, no one came forward to accept the remains. Lance is due back in court August 5, when Harrison is expected to make another argument concerning the questions of whether Lance was mandated to dispose of remains. 5. St. Louis hoarder. When Gladys Stansbury's family lays her ashes to rest, they will bury the only remaining piece of a life that bore more mysteries than memories. Stansbury was cremated after her mummified remains were found in February, by relatives cleaning up the Jennings home of Gladys Jean Bergmeier, Stansbury's daughter. Bergmeier had been found dead in the home 3 weeks earlier. No one knows how long Stansbury had been dead. It's also unclear how she died, or why Bergmeier led some to believe for years that her mother was still living. Experts suggest Bergmeier, a known mama's girl with hoarding tendencies, possibly could not part with her mother after natural death, which could have happened as many as 17 years ago. Few relatives of Stansbury could be tracked down, and even fewer wanted to talk about her life and mysterious death. None of them would say if her remains have at last been put to rest. Conversations with those who would talk, and with neighbors and checks of public records, revealed little about Stansbury's life. She was born somewhere in the metro area on February 7, 1913. Nothing is known of her childhood, or formal education. She married Thomas Stansbury, and the two rented a room, while saving enough money to afford a home of their own. They moved to a small wood frame home they had built in 1950 in West Alton. By then, their daughter, Gladys Jean Stansbury, was a teenager. They also had a son, who has since died. They were not well off by any means, said Carl Wunderlich, who grew up next door to the family. The Stansburys took pride in their small home off Main Street. The older Gladys can often be seen working in her garden, plucking weeds or hanging clothes on a line. Hard work was all they knew, said Wunderlich, who recalled the older Gladys passing homemade cookies over the fence to him and his siblings. The younger Gladys, known as Jean, lived in the 883-square-foot home with her parents into her 40s. She moved out after marrying Paul Bergmeier in the 1970s. Thomas Stansbury died in the home in 1977. After that, Gladys could still be seen poking around in the yard. The details of Gladys Stansbury's last years are even sketchier. The Great Flood of 1993 badly damaged her home, forcing Gladys to move to Jennings with Jean, whose husband had died a few years earlier. Relatives and friends lost contact with Stansbury after that. Betty Collins, Stansbury's niece, said Bergmeier alienated herself and her mother from the rest of the family. We lost touch with Jean shortly after the floods, said Collins, who lives in Riverview. Gladys was such a wonderful lady. There are so many questions we want to ask. Wunderlich, the former neighbor, recalled Stansbury pulling up to her home in the summer of 1994 in a cab. She'd been back several times to do some cleaning, and to gather a few belongings to take back to Jennings. This time was no different. After a few minutes, she emerged from the home, got in the cab and rolled away from Main Street for the last time. No one else who agreed to be interviewed reported seeing her alive after that. The empty house remains on the St. Charles County tax roll as owned by the Stansburys, its taxes paid through last year. Jean, who like her mother never drove, got around by foot, taxi cab or the occasional relative. Anybody who came by Bergmeier's home and asked about Gladys usually got the same response: she was fine. Jean apparently even deceived herself about her mother's status. Relatives found letters and birthday cards written to Bergmeier from her mother and vice versa from recent years. They were in different handwriting styles. Gussie Harrison, a neighbor who had befriended Jean, and even took her in for a while after a fire damaged her home, said she had been inside the home, even in the room where relatives found Stansbury's remains beside a bed. There wasn't a smell or anything, she said. I had no clue. The house was filled with plants, stacks of periodicals and plastic bags stuffed with documents and trash. Gladys Jean Bergmeier may have exhibited some characteristics of a hoarder, said D. Alec Pollard, director of the Anxiety Disorder Center at the St. Louis Behavioral Medicine Institute. He said hoarding simply is defined as the acquisition and holding onto of objects and storing them in places, and in ways that are disruptive to life. She fits the stereotype of the little old lady who lives by herself, Pollard said. It gets worse as she gets older. And there was no one in the house to actively check on issues. Gwen Haugen, a forensic investigator and anthropologist for the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office, said Stansbury had to be identified through circumstantial evidence, because of the advanced state of decay of her body. There also was no close living relative to use for DNA analysis, she said. We were really limited in that the daughter had died, and that she was somewhat reclusive, Haugen said. We knew Stansbury had moved there, and basically, Bergmeier kept her at home. And there's some hoarding behavior, so it's probably a form of mental illness. Nephew Dale Hawkins read a newspaper story in March about Stansbury's mummified remains being found, and immediately began a mission to give her a proper burial. He didn't know much about her, only that she was the child of his grandfather, but with his second wife. His search for a photo to use at her service came up empty. It seems every piece of Stansbury's life washed away in the 1993 flood. And the details of her last days died with Jean, Betty Collins said. 6. Adrift Adventurer. The mummified body of a German adventurer has been discovered, inside an abandoned yacht. The grisly discovery came after two fishermen off the coast of the Philippines alerted authorities to a drifting vessel. The body, found slumped near the boat's radio telephone, has been identified as 59-year-old Manfred Fritz Bajorat. Inspector Mark Navales said the cause of death was unclear, but there were no signs of foul play. It is still a mystery to us, said Navales, adding it looked like Bajorat was sleeping. It is yet unclear how long Bajorat had been missing, but sightings of him have not been reported since 2009. Forensic examiners concluded that Bajorat had died more than 4 days before the yacht was found on Thursday by fishermen in the Philippine Sea about 62 miles from Barabo. Items inside the yacht were scattered, according to Navales, who said the man's wallet was not found but that the yacht's radio, GPS and other valuable items were still there. Local police spokeswoman Goldie Lusiga in the Philippines said, "We have no evidence of a second person aboard, and no weapon was found on the yacht." Dr. Mark Binnick, a forensic criminologist in the German city of Cologne, told Bild newspaper, "The way he is sitting seems to indicate that death was unexpected, perhaps from a heart attack." Officials said dry ocean winds and the salty air helped to preserve his body. As authorities tried to put together the circumstances of Bajorat's death, details of his private life have started to emerge. According to the Sunday, he began his travels with his wife in 2008, but the couple subsequently split up. She later died from cancer. In 2009, Bajorat is said to have met another sailor, identified only as Dieter, who told Bild that Bajorat was an experienced sailor. "I don't believe he would have sailed into a storm," he said. "I believe the mast broke after Manfred was already dead." The German embassy in the Philippine capital, Manila, has been notified and is now working on locating Bajorat's family. He is believed to have a daughter who works as the captain of a freight vessel. 7. Trash, rats, and 300 bottles of urine. In 2015, firefighters exhumed the mummified remains of an elderly woman from her San Francisco home. The residence was infested with rats and filled floor to ceiling with trash, including over 300 bottles of urine. The door was blocked with refuse, and respirator-wearing workers had to enter via a window. It took days to remove enough filth to find the mummified corpse of Anna Rajan, 90. Investigators believe Rajan had been dead for about 5 years. The cause of death remains unknown. No foul play is suspected. Anna's 65-year-old daughter, Carolyn, had been living in the residence for years with the body. According to neighbors, the daughter was delusional, ignoring any attempts at interaction. San Francisco police, fire and medical examiners officials all declined to comment on the case Saturday night. Neighbors described how authorities first visited the home on Tuesday. What they found behind the closed curtains at 152 4th Avenue was a mess so extensive, it was Hoarders 101, or even worse than the TV show, said one neighbor, who declined to be named. A homemaker who lives 2 doors away said a woman named Carolyn lived at the home with her elderly mother, and with a dog that she took for daily walks. The mother had not been seen for several years. The homemaker, who also declined to be identified, said a man living in an in-law unit at the house was informed on Tuesday that the property was in foreclosure and that the younger woman, Carolyn, would be taken to a hospital. Authorities did not identify the residents, and would not confirm if the body removed from the home was that of the elderly mother. Another neighbor, a lawyer who would identify himself only as Michael, said employees from the city's Department of Public Works arrived Wednesday, and began removing debris from the home, filling several trash bins before seeking assistance. A police officer outside the house told me they'd found rats, black widow spiders, 300 bottles of urine and mold on the walls, and they felt they were in over their heads, he said. A professional debris removal team was called in, he said. The home, built in 1904, is listed as being owned by Anna and Archibald Rajan. A man who works at 3rd Avenue Market in the neighborhood said Archibald Rajan died years ago. The man, who identified himself only as Tony, said Carolyn told him she was a retired Pacific Bell worker. For years, she came in daily to buy snacks, but she stopped about a year ago. When he saw her recently on the street, she had become thin and told him she was very sick, and didn't want him to catch what she had, he recalled. I feel really sad for her, he said, adding that if anyone had known her plight, we would have helped her. The secret of the San Francisco house came to light when the daughter mentioned her mother's corpse in passing to a tax consultant. Carolyn has been hospitalized at least once for extreme hoarding. 8. Holy water, prayers, and spells. In August 2016, Russian authorities were shocked to discover that an elderly doctor had used holy water, prayers, and spells for over 4 months in an attempt to revive her husband's mummified corpse. After responding to a flooding faucet in the apartment, neighbors found the desiccated remains of the 87-year-old retiree sitting on the living room sofa. A 76-year-old widower tried to use holy water, prayers and spells to revive her dead husband for more than 4 months, despite being a doctor. Neighbors eventually found the mummified body of the 87-year-old on the sofa in her living room, in Volgograd, Russia. Ex-colleagues of the retired physician said she had no record of psychological problems, but had recently become addicted to a TV show called The Battle of Extrasensory, with presenter Leonid Konovalov. They believe this may have been why she believed she could bring her husband back to life. The man hurt his leg last year and became housebound. He died in April, but she pretended to her sons, neighbors and former work colleagues that he was still alive. She used holy water and uttered prayers and spells, in the expectation she could revive him. The doctor, who has not been named, was a respected medic in the city over many years, said head of Volgograd Office for Russian Investigative Committee Milena Francesova. She allowed neighbors into her flat after a running tap had flooded apartments below. She let them in and neighbors were shocked after seeing almost completely mummified body of her husband lying on the sofa, said a local report. The flat was clean and neatly arranged, they said, but the smell from the body was quite strong. The couple's neighbors said that this shocked them deeply. Some said they had previously noticed the smell, but did not pay attention to it. 9. Not so abandoned house. Plenty of kids poke around abandoned houses, but there's a 12-year-old boy in Dayton, Ohio, who probably won't be doing so again. The boy on Sunday opened the door of a closet in a house that neighbors thought was unoccupied and found a mummified corpse hanging inside, reports CNN. The body was identified as homeowner Edward Brunton, who apparently killed himself just months after buying the home in 2009. Officials say Brunton, who was in his late 40s when he died, was estranged from family and friends and was never reported missing. The body of Edward Brunton, 53, had a belt around his neck, and he likely died by suicide in his rundown home in the city of Dayton, said Ken Betts, director for the coroner's office in Montgomery County in southwestern Ohio. "I've been around a long time, but this is the first time we've had a mummified body indoors for that many years," Betts said. Authorities used personal identification documents, a physical description from Brunton's brother, and other records to identify the body, Betts said. Family members and neighbors said that after years of being homeless, Brunton inherited some money from his mother in 2009, and bought the tiny house for $10,000 cash, Betts said. He likely killed himself shortly after, Betts said. Because he died in the winter and inside a dark closet, Brunton's body tissue dried out and was preserved. No one went looking for Brunton, who was estranged from his family, Betts said, adding that Brunton did not know his neighbors, and had no known work obligations. "This is kind of like the perfect storm in the sense that neighbors were unaware, he just purchased the home, he was a street guy," Betts said. He would not confirm press reports that said, the adventurous 12-year-old boy thought the body he found was a dummy and told his mother to alert authorities. After making the find, the boy ran out of the house to tell his mother. "My son came home and he said to me that he had gone into an abandoned house, and he found a body," she tells Leo. "When he first came across it, he thought it was a dummy, or a mannequin or something. She went to investigate, and says all seemed normal, until she crossed the threshold of the room, and smelled it." Officials say the body, which was hanging from a belt, was leathery and skeletal. Because of the location where he was found, it was relatively protected, sunlight protected, temperature protected and low humidity, the coroner tells WDTV.